All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining and coming here. And we've got some live streaming on as well. Just some housekeeping things. So introduce you to the panel here, which will introduce themselves in a minute. But the topic is around unlocking the power of data leadership and the benefits of joining the International Chief Data Officer Society. So over to you, Peter.
Baz, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here at just about the final sessions for the conference. So we're pleased you guys were willing to stick around. Was anybody here on Monday? Okay. So can we get you guys to react a little bit? I can't do a microphone in front of you just yet to do that. Maybe we can get a mic up here and let you do it. But what was Monday? It was a really nice meeting of CDOs to CDOs, right? Would you like more? Okay. Well, that's what this is all about. So ongoing for this conference, we've had a society called the International Society of Chief Data Officers. And the goal of what we do is, in fact, to have that conversation be more or less continuous. So, Della, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Della Shea, and I am on the executive board for the isCDO, and I've been a member since 2018, where I was introduced to this community as part of this symposium, actually, where after you leave the symposium, then what? And so I was very interested in remaining connected with the folks that I had met and interested in getting more thought leadership and sharing ideas. So that's why I've been involved with the community since then. And I have about 20, just some professional background, I have about 20 plus years of senior roles within data, privacy, enterprise risk, and information security.
That would make her the young person among us, in case you can't tell. Over here we have my good friend Elliot Chikofsky. We've worked together on and off for more than 30 years at this point. Elliot?
Hi, I'm Elliot Chikofsky. I have various roles. I am a member of the executive board for the International Society of Chief Data Officers. I am a IT and management and data and quality consultant with a small consultancy, but advising a whole lot of clients and other organizations in the process. I go back many years in the field to early days of mainframe software engineering and reverse engineering and engineering of data systems and understanding those processes, particularly reverse engineering of what data is actually in our systems and why, and how all the governance we do. If you're governing the data, but it's not really what the data that the systems are really using and doing with, in actuality, what are you accomplishing? Questions like that. I'm going to go over for a moment a little bit about the International Society of Chief Data Officers as a background for our discussion. We hope to have this interactive discussion in the room here with you on where do we need to go. But just some background, you have a general description of isCDO on the slides. We're the premier vendor-neutral professional organization established for and by CDOs to promote data leadership. The kinds of issues in our mission is promoting data literacy throughout, first of all, promoting data literacy among CDOs. It's amazing the difference of degrees of backgrounds, degrees of knowledge, degrees of understanding just in people with the title CDO or other titles in the organization related to that. And getting data literacy in our organizations as a whole, it helps to start with making sure that, the teacher's able to teach in the process.
Or if you're a musician, singing off the same sheet of paper, right? That's a real appropriate metaphor since so many of us are musicians here in the room. So.
But I guess this also applies to the rest of the executives in the organization, right?
Baz, you have the microphone.
Exactly.
I guess this topic also applies not only to chief data officers, but also to other executives in the organizations and overall. So I think it's important that everybody is somehow familiar with data, right?
Absolutely.
Do you agree with that?
And a big part of the role of many CDOs is as somebody who's got to educate the rest of the C-suite and the rest of wannabes for the C-suite in their organizations. Yet even getting them to understand what's the necessity of that gets me an issue. So there is leadership development in general among CDOs, and what it means to be a CDO. What I hate to use the word standard because it invokes all sorts of other baggage, but what standards do we have for what do we mean by CDO? Even our basic terminology, we sort of need an ontology of ontologies of CDOs of data in the process. We're looking to what needs to be done to advance this area as a profession. This conference is really interesting to me. 35 years ago, literally this week in this same hotel, I was dealing with conferences on software engineering issues and computer-aided software engineering. And when you were dealing with the data side of that, it's funny that some of the same issues we were talking about then are some of the same issues being dealt with in sessions now. Of course, the speed is an issue that has changed. Of course, we now have ChatGPT, et cetera, and so forth that are the latest concerns in the process, but there's always been concerns. So the question is, are we really advancing as a profession at this point, or are we treading water as the flood's rising? And how do we change that? How do we get CDOs working with other CDOs across our organizations, across the industry, to figure out what we need to do to stop treading water and start making progress? Can we reduce redundant work and redundant effort? Everybody's trying to search a lot of the same things. And it's interesting to go past the booths at the conference here and just listen to the conversations that were happening, not just what was being said with the vendors, and realizing how many people are busy trying to look at the same things and not necessarily having the words to say to recognize it. And there is general cooperation and coordination among CDOs and as an industry. We have, quite a potential here, but we've always had that potential for data positions in organizations. But now data is being started to be really recognized, and the importance and the need and we have a great opportunity at this time in the industry, in all of our industries and our separate topic industries. What can we do to make that work, to take that advantage, that opportunity we have now? Some of the points of importance of membership: professional growth and development, networking and collaboration, access to resources and research. And just think about it as the goal of isCDO in part is the conference here, the discussions you're having in the hallway when the conferences are not in session. Because what you don't necessarily learn by going to the conference, you get exposed to things. But it's when you go back to your own organization and are trying to say, how do I apply this to what I gotta do tomorrow, next week, next month? And how do I make it work? And now is when I really gotta talk to somebody, but I'm not at the conference. How do I do that? How do I connect to the other CDOs and have those opportunities? So there are various kinds of benefits of membership. I'll leave this slide up for, get my controls right here. And we'll talk further on it. But the goal here is to say, what do you as CDOs need in your work that other CDOs can help with, that we as an industry organization can make headway and progress and help each of us in our jobs?
It'd be an appropriate time to tell a CDO story. Some of the times you bumped your head on things.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So in my experience with working with the isCDO and why I became quite involved at the executive committee level, is because there was things that I thought were problems that somebody else had solved before. And I was bumping my head up against, like, hey, how do you approach a problem such as trying to get everyone to speak the same language and use the same terminology, especially around cross-organizational collaboration. So depending on who you talk to, what was the way they were defining just basic terms differed. So being able to connect with other CDOs and putting some programming around topics such as data literacy, data strategy, and then having people that were experienced and having solved maybe not solved them, but certainly experienced in working through those, having curated discussions. So more than just a webinar, but an actual curated discussion around sharing those information, things that worked well, things that didn't work well. So that was really my key thing that drew me to this organization.
And you never had to educate anybody above you, right?
Right.
To your point.
Exactly, yes. And having multiple conversations with other members of how do you tell the story to people that in their roles, especially talking to the C-suite, it's not their job to understand everything about data. So it's about how do you tell a story without even using the word data. And you do not use words like data quality, et cetera. That's not relevant. But establishing a language that makes sense to then try to foster a culture of not just understanding, but actually buying into the fact that the data, and I was in a session earlier today, and somebody had kind of described it as being like the wind beneath your wings. It's kind of like getting, in order to achieve those high-level executive strategic directions, how does this play into achieving those goals? So I relied very heavily on colleagues in helping tell that story.
But that was a very interesting analogy because you're talking about, the wind beneath your wings. But if you think about airplanes and fixed-wing aircraft, it's the wind over the wing that is providing the lift, actually.
Oh, don't confuse us with physics, Elliot. Come on.
No, but it's,
You're true.
it is the issue of, how can you be lifted, but you've got to also have the pull from the C-suite as well in the process.
But I think the networking, to your point, the networking piece, so having made those connections, being able to have a real authentic and trusted conversation with somebody that was either in the same boat or had experienced the same thing, and then also being able to provide that to somebody else.
I just had an interesting conversation in the hall. We have a number of doctoral students here, as you might imagine, being this close to all these wonderful institutions. And so I was trying to sort of herd them together so that they can all exchange pain. And one of the gentlemen was, I can't believe it, the conference is not over and most of these people are leaving. It's like, yeah, it's a business conference. The flight's out, right? It's the way it works. He said, I think about this stuff 24/7. I said, yeah, I'm sure you do. But at the same time, our managers are not.
Right.
And this is what we have to do. We've all come to data through different pathways. And if you remember the picture of the blind people and the elephant, right? One of them's got the ears, and so they think this is what data is, and somebody else has got the tail, and they think that's what data is. Somebody else has got the trunk of the elephant in there, and somebody else is, it's a wall, I mean, these are all correct answers, but nobody really has that whole picture. And that's one of the things we need to do is to level set so that when you do come on as a data professional, you've got at least a base level set of knowledge that you can use.
And I just want to say, like the isCDO, there's lots of organizations that are providing support and communities for chief data officers. I really felt that and I'm members of all of them, but this one to me is special because it was more grassroots. The intention is to be and remain vendor neutral to build that kind of collective community. And I just think that's really an important feature to ensure that we call out here.
So another thing that we're trying to put together are a series of resources for you. And we have things like job descriptions and 30, 60, 90-day plans, little out-of-the-box kits. These are not to be taken and applied unjudiciously. We still need you to think about the process. And then more importantly, tell us what works and what doesn't work about it so we can improve it, put it back in. If you guys know me at all, I'm fairly famous for being able to do 120 PowerPoints in an hour. So it's usually the wrong ratio if you think about it right from there. But people are always coming up and saying, can I use your diagrams? And I say, absolutely, because I got them all from you in the first place. And so, it'll go away, it'll come back, somebody will come back and say, hey, there's a better way of describing it. Great, let's make us all smarter and let's get it. Because in data, we're all kind of pushing uphill, right? It's really been years and years and decades for us in that sense.
Also, the 120 slides in 15 minutes is why he's not the one holding the control for the slides. We've learned. So I want to examine where are your pain points? What are the kinds of things that, as a CDO, you want to understand from other CDOs?
And how can we help?
Baz as a microphone for anyone in the room. We can also, I'm understanding we can get questions from online, but I'm not sure how they come into the room here.
I went through Wovia and I'm looking and they're not
Okay.
there yet. Any question? I mean, any feedback on the kind of where it can help?
So in that case, if there's no questions, they're all experts, right?
Thank you. Full disclosure, not a CDO, but I do governance. One thing that would be really helpful for me, I think, are standards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I've been fortunate to work in organizations that have these things, and so I kind of know what those look like. But that kind of stops at a certain point, right? Then, rather than having to create it on my own, it'd be great to have a website where I can pull one down and modify it.
Yes, so thank you
It's
for
like an
saying that.
external data sharing standard.
Thank you for saying that, because I know this is a discussion I have with the board almost weekly about, from a practical perspective, what's really helpful is to have things what I call accelerators, so that you don't have to do everything from scratch. And that really is something that we have been talking about quite seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to elaborate on that? Because I know with DAMA that certainly you have a lot of experience in building standards.
Actually, DAMA does not do quite as much in the standards area as most people think. But more importantly, it's
The
about building
DIMBOK.
communities. Yes. Well, if the DIMBOK's a standard,
Yeah.
we would never make that claim in public. But you're right, it's been used that way. The key, all right, let's a little back up. We started in DAMA International in 2007 or so with the release of the first data management body of knowledge. And that body of knowledge was imperfect. It was actually a guide to the body of knowledge. It was really, you come here and then there's pointers out to read these books if you're interested in this topic, or talk to these people if you're in this type of a topic here. But the second time we did it, again, all volunteer effort in that sense. The book has become about 400 pages. It's pretty big. We have a certification process around it, and we're going to get to certification because we want to ask you guys some questions about that. But to at least have something written somewhere, and the story Della is talking about is that they passed a law in DC saying that all of the federal agencies need to have a chief data officer, that all of their data was by default open data, so it wasn't a matter of looking around your data and deciding which parts you were going to share. It's all open. That's a big mind change for most of the federal agencies. And that the third part was that they had to do best standards. And everybody went, what's that?
What's that?
We should do that in harmony, right?
Yeah.
And the answer was, though, interestingly enough, the DIMBOK. Now, as I said before, it's not intended in any way, shape, or form as a standard, but apparently there's nothing better. And so we at least have something there, and that's one of our projects that we've been talking about here, is to try and put together a body of knowledge for CDOs. Now, let's even take the name CDO. I was very opposed to calling it a CDO because, of course, if you look on LinkedIn, it kind of does this. There's more chief digital officers, and then there's more chief data officers, and then there's more chief digital. What does that tell you? Nobody's made up their minds yet, right? There's still a lot of uncertainty around it. What's my favorite term? Top data job. Because any of you can take a piece of paper and put it on your desk and say, I'm in charge of all the data for this organization. Now, what'll probably happen if you're not in the right place of your organization, somebody will come along and say, Karsten, who told you you could put that on your desk? And what you say is, oh, well, if not me, then whom? Right? Because there does need to be somebody in charge and accountable. If we let everybody do anything they want to with all of the organization's data, oh my goodness, right? Probably the IP will walk out the door. There'll be some lawsuits coming along.
You can't do things with my data.
Exactly.
What do you
I'm even to the point now where I'm old enough and cranky enough. If somebody says, I want to own the data, I say, fine, I'm not going to work with you, right? If you're in an organization, the data belongs to the organization. It does not belong to any person or division or anything else in the organization. By the way, if they insist on it anyway, you say, okay, if you really want to own the data, you can own the requirements of the data from the time it hits your business process until the time it leaves the business process that you're in charge of. And they all of a sudden find out how much work it is to do data requirements. Oh, I'm not sure I want to do this.
Now, another strategy is that you actually say, oh, you want to own that data. That's great. You are now the owner of that data, and we'll be coming to you with questions and for access and so forth. And if we really can identify those clustered data owners, And they can naturally form a data council in the organization, in the company, that really can get to those issues of sharing and issues of where they overlap and issues of, what does ownership mean? And that's a way to get into discussions.
So we've built a community of professionals on the DAMA side, but they're not really focused on data leadership. We've kept ours down at the technical level and sort of working in warehousing and mining and profiling and all that sort of thing. And that's really where we all started to say, wow, if Peter's going to talk about putting a sign on somebody's desk, we better define what a data leader is. Exactly.
And a side note here, since at that point we have mentioned DAMA, the isCDO as an organization unit has been working with a number of our other organizations, for example, with the CDOIQ Symposium, and we came out of here as a founded it years earlier version of the Symposium. We've worked on projects with EDM Council, have discussions there, and with DAMA International and others. These are the sort of a big three to make sure to mention.
Are you guys familiar with EDM Council? It's really focused on the top financial markets, so they have a very good.
We saw a presentation.
Would be surprised if you hadn't, right?
Yeah, I saw a presentation.
Good group.
Yeah.
Good group.
One more.
Sure.
One more thought. Tool evaluation questions. So like even coming to the conference, if I just had like a little pamphlet or a little sheet that had the questions I should be asking, like an MDM tool versus a catalog tool, that would be helpful. And then a more detailed one online that I could use when doing evals.
So even some handouts when people walk into the conference the first time.
Or like providing assessments or opinions on various tools, like a tool evaluation.
Ooh, those people at the end of the hall might not be too happy about that. We have to depend on our vendor community.
We don't do that today,
Right.
but I think it's something to think about, is really looking at what are the needs of the CDOs, and perhaps even providing the forum to have those discussions and that information sharing.
Exactly. In other words, holding up grades for those guys probably not the best thing
Yeah.
to do. But at the same time, if you had a back channel communication where you said, I'm really looking for somebody who had experience with
Right.
tool X. Della, could you tell me about it? Could we set up a conversation? Those are the kinds of things exactly that we want to facilitate.
Well, related.
Yeah, that certainly is the type of content that is being curated by the isCDO.
For example, I gave a presentation on our webinar series fairly recently on how to lose productivity with productivity tools. Because how do you even begin to look at tools and understand what the issues around tools and when tools meet real organizations and real users? And what types of questions does that mean the organization has to think about for whatever kind of tool set they're looking for? So these are topics that we come to in for webinars and things. Having a ready checklist that'll work, we may get there if we've got a number of CDOs that are willing to contribute to the discussion. This is how these things get created. We
So
are
that's
very
an important point, because the isCDO isn't just a one-way channel where you're coming in getting all this stuff. It really depends on the contributions of the members.
If we're looking at, again, just even evaluating or talking about back channel communications, those are some of the most important ones. We love coming to these conferences. I learn every time, and I've been coming here for 17 years, right? So it's wonderful to come and learn, but also you bump into people and have these really surprising side conversations that spark all sorts of other things. These are things we all missed during COVID. And it's also something that we don't have, because if you go to a CDO conference from IBM, you know what you're going to hear about? All of IBM's tools. Nothing wrong with them. They work really well. If you go to a Deloitte conference on CDO, you're going to hear about Deloitte's process. Again, nothing wrong with any of them, but you really want to have what's going on in the background here. And that's what we want to try to facilitate, so that we can set everybody up and lift all the boats at once. Gwen.
We lost the mic.
How about now? So I've really enjoyed the conference, and one of the things that has been surprisingly missing from the conversation I mean, because there's been a lot of discussion about how data governance it's a team sport and the importance of the CDO, working across the organization and how projects should involve, cross-functional teams and all that great stuff. But there hasn't been a discussion about how do you manage, these cross-functional teams where you have, data professionals, people from the business line. You have to bring these folks together. They all speak different languages. How do you promote teaming among, these individuals that are coming from different backgrounds? Also, how do you promote, working across, diversity, bringing diversity into the conversation, not just, social demographic differences, but also just differences in backgrounds. And it just seems that, CDO would want to, have some knowledge, in how to bring these differences, people coming from different areas of the organization together to have conversations.
I'm going to violently agree with you, Gwen, but say it's not even just most. We've done studies. If you saw Randy Bean's topic, he does a great survey every year. It's at newvantage.com. He keeps all his data very public. And every year he starts out the survey with the question, are your problems primarily people and process problems, or are they technology problems? And for the last 7 years, it's been 80-20, that technology is 20% of our problems and people and process problems are 80. And I'm seeing all your heads nodding in here. Okay, these are things that we need to be addressing. And a technology solution is not the right answer. In fact, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, because this is, resonating with me a fair bit, because it even goes deeper in terms of the focus has traditionally been around technology. And so I think the content still continues to be around very technical things. And when you try to get funding for things such as change management, it's really hard because it's not tangible. Versus I need to buy a tool and this tool is going to cost X number of dollars. So here's the operating expenses. Here's the year over year dollars that is going to be required to maintain it. Good, I can put it in a business case and move on. But it's, to your point, there's probably 80% of funding required to do all of the implementation, all of the culture, doing that change. So topics like this, in the past, we certainly have been collecting thoughts from the community and then curating a session or a webinar that's pretty different, just on, something that was really resonating with one of the members. And we bring in experts to talk about it.
Before I forget again, I've done it twice so far. The talk that Elliot described, if you're interested in it, is online at our website, isCDO.org, so you can just go right out there and grab it. More importantly, all of the talks that we've done in those areas are out there at the moment, so that people can get them and replay them. And again, we're grateful for everybody for sharing their knowledge around that. Go ahead.
I would just love to see, conferences like this one bring in experts like Amy Edmondson from Harvard, to discuss, how do you team up? Now you have to, you have to install this new piece of equipment. How do you pull together a team of folks and get them to be productive, as quickly as possible?
And Gwen, one of the tricks I use
true.
when people tell me that they're going to invest $1 million in Informatica, just to pick on them, wonderful stuff, right? I say, great, where's the other $4 million that I need to have in order to make Informatica work well for your organization? And this is actually the same problem they have at the other end of the hall. They are all frustrated. One of my investment, places where I stick my investment money, 403Bs or K, whatever we're doing with all the, I'm too close to retirement, so I'm not even thinking about it at this point. They purchased a data governance package about 6 years ago. They've never taken the shrink wrap off it because the requirement is, do you have one? Their answer is, yes, we do. Of course, we should be asking a different question, shouldn't we? Are you using one? They can't answer that question, yes. And the vendor's very frustrated, and that's a very common pattern that you'll hear. So this is not an us versus them situation. They would be absolutely pleased to have really smarter customers on the other end of this. And it's not us that aren't smart. We know what to do, but when you take a package like Informatica and put it in an organization, and this is low-level stuff, right? There's all sorts of higher-end things that you can get into. It still requires an awful lot of acculturation to get people to understand how to do these things. Probably a good idea to clean your data before you publish it. Just call me crazy, but garbage in, garbage out, right? Thank you, Glenn, that's great.
That reminds me of a project I was doing on the recording here. I can't mention names, of course, with an organization that had a strategy of zero latency is what they wanted. Anytime, as soon as data was entered at one part of the organization, it would be immediately available, with proper access controls and such, in any other part of the organization that needed that data. And I was asked as part of a consulting firm to come in and look over their strategy and their plan and whatever. And it was a great strategy. It was a great plan. They looked like they'd have the investment, they'd have the leadership support, they could actually implement zero latency. Then they got real mad at me when I said, well, what are you doing about the quality of data? Because bad data is going to propagate as quickly as the good data, and you can't tell the difference. You have no mechanism. It was a whole piece of the overhead of the planning and thinking about what needed to go into using these type of tools that they hadn't even thought to consider yet. And the chance of success if they do that, well, they could be very successful implementing the tool, but then the tool would be propagating all the bad data. And I look today with our issues with ChatGPT and the other systems and whatever, and going, wow, that's really great. What was the estimate at a lunch discussion? Was somebody saying is, it's got like an 85% correctness rate. I'm going, that's great. How do you know whether you're looking at the 15% or the 85% when you're looking at that results coming out? How do you even begin to assess that? So, thinking along those lines or whatever, I can give you the prediction of the next multi hundreds of $1 million market. It's got to be AI systems for policing, AI systems to figure out whether we're using things that are copyrighted, whether the stuff is real, whether it is fake data, or whatever. These are all things that as a CDO, we have to think about for our organizations. It's the overheads involved. It's a place where CDOs and CIOs start to really differ, because many of the CIOs never successfully got to the point where they could talk about what it's going to cost the organization to do this. They could talk about the technologies, they could talk about the base of the systems. But what other investment we need in the people, in the methods, in the way of working, in the organizational change, a lot of the CIOs over the last couple of decades have never gotten there. The CDOs finally might be somebody in a position to at least ask that question. The trouble is, it's not clear that our rest of the C-suite is going to invest in it. And so, while, as Gwen mentioned, having the discussion about how do you make the cross-functional teams work and whatever, well, I also want to see some sessions on how do you convince your the funding parts of the organization to fund to have those teams to get into that discussion. That's not clear. So maybe one of the things we need in CDO work is a track on finance and organization re-engineering decision making in the process.
And let's go to re-engineering. Whenever I'm asked to help a group create their governance strategy or charter or whatever documents they are, I always make sure that I write in the words re-engineering in there, because it's not typically part of a CIO's remit to say, I'm going to change the business processes. It should be, but it's not. But if we can take that on ourselves here, then when we bring forward an idea and say, you're using this system, the only thing that system does is change A to B. And we can do that actually with some really inexpensive scripting without having to have a system and people supporting it and all. And you eliminate lines of code, you eliminate additional work that doesn't occur. 40% of IT dollars are spent converting, improving, or cleaning data. That's crazy. On the other hand, 40% of internet traffic is actively hostile. So maybe that's just the world we live in, but I don't think it's what we should settle for on that far. So what are some of the other things that you guys have? Certainly the change management issues. Let me give you a vocabulary on that too. Most people think of those as soft skills, right? New word, transferable skills. Something good from the academic community for a change, right? They're skills you can use in a number of different places, and we want to make sure those are part of it.
I'll give you one more T, which is
Yeah.
transformative.
Transformative skills, good. That's what the re-engineering stuff we need to have. What else? What do you guys, make a wish list. If you could snap your fingers and we could do something for you. Kirsten?
First of all, many thanks for all your efforts. I really appreciate that. I'm in the situation establish the role and the organization from scratch in our insurance group. So I would need everything on information you have. And I like it, but for me the picture is not clear. So do you have any target operation model like this, or any organizational picture? How are the relationships? So there's your new organization, there's the CDOIQ, there's the Della, there's anything else. CDOIQ makes conferences. Will you make as well conferences? Will you have a document framework? How should it run
Good.
all together? And
Good
how are
question.
the
I
relationships?
would think of us in a bit more like the, well, over industry and time, it's been various forms of toaster model. You have a lot of these organizations, conferences, things that are doing slices this way. But we're part of the base doing things across. So we don't necessarily want to create a lot of other conferences. There are groups that are doing that, but have the way to interconnect that and interconnect the people who are attending, participating, speaking at the various conferences, and provide that sharing outside of the conference mechanism.
Because I think what you're asking is, do we have things that could be leveraged, like target operating models that were used as a template or a toolkit? Is that what you're looking for?
No, that was one part of the question. So any material you have is appreciated. Templates, organizations, 90-day program, whatever. But the other part of the question was, how do you want to operate the community?
Right. So we have some ideas. At the moment, there are lots of CDO groups that are springing up in cities. And so we're trying to reach out to them and have them become affiliates with us so that we can start to populate this on a geographic basis. There's one in London right now. I think there's one in maybe Munich, I'm not sure. But anyway, there are some like that. We also, by the way, don't have a lot of resources, so it's limited in terms of what we can do. It's really volunteer at this point. But the model is we put things out there, and what we're trying to do is sort of attract attention. Think of throwing a ball to a bunch of cats, right? Half the cats will be like, eh, but one cat will go, oh, that's really cool, right? We're looking for those people that grab that piece, and then we literally do have the resources to reach out to them and say, hey, there's at least another person in your city. Could the two of you guys get together and hold a meeting? And if you did, we'll pop in on video, or if we're close enough, we'll drop in person and start to inspire people in this way and bring up, oh, it's one in the Middle East that Althea was working on, remember. So that's basically, it's a very much of a low budget, grow organically kind of process with hopefully the links into, again, I'll put my DAMA hat on and say DAMA's enthusiastic about working with the isCDO. So we're trying to work out a specific operating agreement where if you join one organization, you'll probably be able to join the other and that sort of thing, but not quite there yet.
But also it's making the connections, because the webinars that we have held and the discussion sessions that have been held have been driven by CDOs having a particular interest in a particular topic, and are finding the right speakers and the connections to get that and get those cross discussions. Why don't you describe some of the cross discussion sessions, types of things that have
The roundtables.
roundtables that have happened?
Well, I haven't been to the
Oh, you
ones
haven't,
recently
yeah.
because I've been traveling
That's right.
for the past few weeks.
Another thing that we've done is we'll pick a topic and just sort of hold a virtual roundtable. We started them during the pandemic. It seemed to work pretty well. Just 40 or 50 people that get on a Zoom session, hopefully, not in the middle of the night, wherever you happen to be, and have some good discussions about it. But most importantly, capture something from those discussions that we can then sort of send around and say, hey, we put a bunch of people together, came up with this, what do others think? Now, again, we've got to work on our website and our technology changes. That's just another minor detail, but not insignificant detail, so that we can bring you into a forum type of an environment, and then you can really comment on it.
But certainly, the topics that I found very useful was how to create and deliver a data strategy, because you hear about this all the time. You need to have a document, and what is the strategy, but even really trying to figure out what is the output of what that is, and have people done it, and are these things that can be shared? So that one I found particularly interesting. Another one was like a vendor wish list. So again, having some practical discussion on what are the questions that we should be asking vendors when evaluating tools.
Is there a way to share? Hey, is there a way to share experiences? Let's say, if I'm working in a particular project with a particular tool, a particular vendor, I would like to hear, who has done it before or something similar. I mean, you can sanitize it the way you want, if you want to use numbers, whatever, but sometimes you feel like talking to somebody else to say, hey, did you implement this? How did it go? Give me the highlights, because I'm about to start a project.
Right.
So just something like that. That's one aspect. And the other one is, you were referring to CIOs, and to full disclosure, I'm a CIO, but I'm fully responsible of data.
Mm-hmm.
Because it depends on the organization, right? So
About 1 in 10 does that.
Exactly. So yeah. So when you mention it's good to know who is the top data leader or executive or whatever, that applies to CIOs as well.
Absolutely.
But again, the way you combine those two and how they interact is also important, because helping my data executives to work with me and also go to the top management, right? So those two aspects, how to share experiences and how to work together, let's say CIOs with CDOs, if they exist, or not the other organization, right? I don't know, any perspectives on that?
Well, we do have a little talk on that. So one of the federal agencies had a little, kind of that at first, and they sat down and worked it out, and they've come up with a really nice operating route. So again, I think it's a 1-hour video out there that can give some good information on that. One person's model, it may not work for you, but why should we all have to learn the same lesson over and over again, right? If you've implemented something over here, share that experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a key part of the vision, which Elliot talked about at the beginning, is the vendor neutrality, and to open up an opportunity for people to have very candid and respectful conversations to try to get to a solution a lot faster and in more of an unbiased way.
Also, I think of it in the way when doing work with U.S. federal agencies, referred to as a data call. And a data call often is coming from, some requirement from some other agency coming in and saying, you must answer these questions. But on a voluntary basis, think of a data call among CDOs where we put out to our wide group connected CDOs to say, who else is working in this area? We'd just like to identify that group so we can cause some of those discussions to occur. And maybe they're discussions that will occur, not be recorded or
Cider house rules, right? Everything stays in the room, no attribution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it has already, in my experience, created some very valuable discussions to find out what others have been doing that is the same or similar. And it may be related to certain tools. It may be related to some of the best discussions I've been part of have been, quiet ones related to the psychology and sociology of working with your management in the process, and what things that have worked and not worked in some organizations that they are not necessarily willing to talk about in the rest of the public space or in a conference like this. But we can create among CDOs the chance for private spaces and those kind of discussions, and that can be some of the most valuable.
An example of that, there was a session earlier yesterday from the government in Holland, South Holland, and Margot, yeah.
Yes, it'd be great.
And Margot talked about how communities have to share information across different across different teams, different assets, different best practices, and how her team was chartered to go build an application called DesNap. So if you get a chance to listen to Margot's talk and how she's gone about herself building an open platform used by, and how she failed. She did multiple applications, and she's third year into it now, and now the next launch is actually got a wider adoption of building communities, not just necessarily related to chief data officers, but related to actual communities within the government. And that's what they're doing.
And we have some government organizations that do give us a model already. So again, the federal government has made this rule change and said there must be a CDO council, at least in the federal government. So now the state governments are starting to follow, and hopefully local governments will start to follow that. Again, Margot's example is a very good one in there. But, you know, it's just frustrating to think of the amount of wasted time where people are, okay, I'm going to go try this. I'll do all the looking around. I'll find all the things. You know, individually, that just makes no sense whatsoever. Especially, do we think data is going to be more important in the future or less important? Yeah, right. It's kind of obvious when it comes that way. So we need to do more. Another place we need to do is we need to work on curriculum. Again, Elliot and I both are associated with universities. My university has an outdated curriculum because the standards body that mandates our curriculum has not modernized, and they need to hear from you. They're not going to listen to us as academics. That's just academics talking. But when industry comes and knocks on the door and says, hey, I want some more data in the curriculum, and it's not just more data. We have to be even more specific about it than that. I want to know the cultural issues around data. I want to know what the management types of issues. I want to know what the risks are around data, not just algorithms. Right? And so we've got to get a lot further than that.
That goes back to the managing cross-functional teams. I need students coming out who are in a position to have some idea what it is to even work on a cross-functional team and really be successful at it, and how those teams can be managed and supported.
And we don't have to invent it all here. There's a lot of good research in other areas. We've been doing team, optimization for years and years, but to pretend that body of knowledge doesn't exist is nuts. So let's grab it, bring it in. It's like ignoring library science if you're a data person, right? If you don't understand how much library science has contributed to this field, it's just crazy.
Just a question on, some moderated question, but question on, a lot of enterprise clients would use a service provider to do this work, outsource it basically. And then you're now trying to build a community and collaboration between internal resources and multiple service providers with their own agendas. How do you see that dynamic?
It's an interesting dynamic. Usually the first CDO runs into a brick wall. Karsten, I hate to make predictions here. I'm sure you'll be more successful than I'm anticipating here, right? But the first one is going to be breaking new ground. And so one of the things that organizations are now getting advised to do is to rent your first CDO. Make somebody else who's not an employee come in, get all the bad PR, get beat up, and when things are shaken up, then we, at the same time, have our transition plan so that when that one gets essentially used up, we have somebody else who can come in and say, okay, great. Now, I know you didn't like the last one, but here we're going to do things a little differently this way. That seems to be catching on, which means we can also do fractional things. Again, many of you probably are too large organizations, but there are fractional CDOs out, not fractional CDOs, fractional CFOs out there, where if you're just a small organization, you need somebody that's a CFO one day a week who can come in and really do the expertise in there. I'll give you another interesting development here. Della's Canadian, and I've been doing some work for CPA Canada. They've decided that CPAs will make the best data leaders. And they are taking very strong action. They are moving forward. They have a plan. They've got all sorts of things. They're going to train CPAs to be data literate and some of the other things. Yeah, it's wonderful stuff. only country in the world that I know that is
Yeah.
doing this, but wow, what an interesting development, right?
Well, there's a lot of parallels between
Certainly.
the two disciplines.
Certainly. Well, I'll tell you, so my wife is an accountant, and when we were telling each other what we do, she kind of said, oh, so you data people haven't figured out what a general ledger is yet. I married her.
And I was going to take your general question and saying, how do you handle, that when you've got, trying to build the support across teams, across people across parts, and they're coming from different support organizations and completely different, organizations that you're hired, and with when at contract renewal time they could suddenly go away and whatever. And what's their experience with that? And I'd say the experience I've seen the most is it falling flat on its face. That the organization has got to put in the extra resources for managing across that process and create those points of contact within the organization that are responsible. It's not just handing off and having people, they might staff the roles and do, the legwork and things, but it's still got to be owned by parts of the organization that are going to be there, and not when the next contract renewal happens, suddenly might not be there.
Just to the dependency on third parties to do your data management and understand your data and own the data. Word ownership of data, when the organization themselves are not owning the data. They have a chief data officer, but in this example, the major company, big fine because they're about to hit a big fine because the algorithms which were written by the contractor organization did not meet the business objectives. Who's on the hook here? The contractor is basically saying, I was given a specification, I did what I was supposed to do, but the way the code was written was not optimum to the solution. The business is going ballistic because it's about to hit a major penalty and a fine because it's not producing the numbers which are needed for Wall Street. Yeah. So the dynamics of the chief data officer now, who's inherited in this case, an outsourcer who's managing his data and his analytics for him, is now how does the pendulum move back inside to have control around what the outsourcer is doing for him? It's an interesting dynamic.
Well, hopefully they had KPIs and targets within their contracts. Yeah,
But if you don't know to put them in there, they might not.
Exactly,
Yeah.
because it comes down to a basic accountability. You're still accountable if the business decision was to hire outside contractors. You don't get to contract out the accountability.
But the pendulum is now going to swing, saying, okay, we're not using the outsiders, we're going to do everything in-house now, we're going to do it with our in-house AI. And now you get the accountability problems of that, and saying, can you fire your in-house AI?
It's an
Question,
interesting
Mike.
role to talk about.
I was just going to offer another idea.
Let's get you on microphone.
Our internet colleagues.
Thank you. Another idea, use cases, typical use cases. I don't know what common data problems are with the general ledger, but I'm sure that there are. So it'd be just kind of nice to have some place to go and kind of read about what those might be. Same thing, supply chain, finance.
So this gets back into best practices, right? So if somebody comes at you with use cases, one of the first things I want to see is an integrated data dictionary so that all the nouns in the use case all have the same definitions. And you'd be amazed at how many times people haven't thought about that as part of a use case development. It's standard, but it's left out of almost all of them.
Sure, yeah, those things are in the DIMBOK, right? And that's really good. But when I go talk to the accountants, what types of questions can I ask them to lead them to the conclusion that we need a data catalog or a data dictionary, these types of things. So here's a general ledger, here are common problems with it. Here's how you go about solving.
You ever seen a group do a year-end reconciliation?
No.
You haven't? Oh, that's always a process.
I haven't, but I'm sure it's a problem. Same thing, again, like supply chain, operations, logistics, like all these different functional groups. it'd be great just to know what their common problems are.
And these are things we can do, is survey the body that we have out there. What are your top 5 problems? What are the things we should do? We're kind of guessing from your comments. Some of you are very kind to give us evaluations on all the sessions and things, and we use that and try to figure out where we're going. But wouldn't it be great just to have some good hard facts and say, these people wanted to see this speaker, you know, or that kind of thing. I mean, again, it's just, there's more we can do as we get there.
We have about 5 minutes left in the session. If you can, summarize what are some of the key takeaway points you want the audience to have.
If we're all trying to do this individually, it's going to be harder. So if we all get together, solve some of these common problems, we can all go further and faster. That's what we're trying to do. That's been what I've been very fortunate in my career, to be able to actually get paid to do this. So it's a wonderful thing.
I would say just the importance of having a peer community to have very candid and collaborative discussions and working sessions in an environment that you can have those Chatamos rules.
And I'd say the key thing of that peer community for me is that potential of cross discussions, private discussions, finding out what others are doing that they don't necessarily are able to say in a presentation or in. Think of this conference and think of the hallway discussions that have occurred. It's obviously something that when we were on the pandemic and all on the internet was not occurring. Those on the internet now aren't quite getting that. But part of the goal of isCDO is for those discussions to be able to continue year-long throughout the sets of conferences and the things that we go to, and make those connections and have the ability of having your own local community to ask as a CDO and say, who's done this? Who has thought about it? What do you have in the way of a list, a checklist, this? Have you got something in your organization sort of like this that I can, take a look at and go further?
Just can I add to that?
Please.
Just a level set in terms of expectations. We're not an EDM council or Gartner or any organization.
$10 million budget.
Exactly, or any organization that has a huge budget to produce content and events. The intention is really going back to the heart of what this conference was about, which is grassroots. It's based and rooted in the MIT CDOIQ Symposium to be able to connect us until the next time that we are able to meet.
All right, thank you for all participating.
Any questions for the panel?
All right, well, we hope we can get you guys to come talk to us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. And
talk
thank you again for staying close to the end of the conference.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion and the topic. Very much peer-led in terms of collaboration across all worldwide, really, in terms of sharing knowledge and experience and building teams of communities out there. So thank you very much for sharing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Membership. Sorry? How many members?